basically, I wanted to remove the whole idea of gamification from the game. Like, there were no points. It's just like a wandering landscape that starts telling you stories in the VR space.
Okay, so as it's doing that, it also starts singing.
This is crazy.
It's like a secret level.
Oh. So, hi, Sahej. Welcome to Bricolage. So, would you like to tell us something about yourself first? How you got into art and what inspires you?
Very thank you so much. This is really, excited and honored because this is like your first podcast.
Yes.
And, really happy to be in conversation with you. I'm actually really excited about the name of your studio, Bricolage, and because I've been really like fascinated by the idea of bricolage, and like what does it mean for a world to kind of come out through a process of bricolage. That's essentially what I do really. Like for the longest time, even in like art school, I was idea kind of began with not wanting to explain what I'm doing with. Or knowing what it means and things like that while I'm making these things. So bricolage became like a way of just saying that, like, this is kind of just a larger thing that's unfolding and I'm just adding pieces to it. So very briefly, if I kind of explain what I'm doing is like, I'm trying to create like this counter mythology, that's kind of like entering our world and like, it's sort of creatures are appearing from random corners of the city, and a lot of it like also began with just picking up things around Bombay and like kind of putting them into sculptures and like also almost like it became a game of negotiating with the city, like what kind of story shape this story is going to take. So and Bombay kind of strangely is a bricolage as well, no? Like constantly it's been changing, developing,
constant flux,
and and also in its architectural form, in its sort of, in its social structure, it feels like everything is just shifting like ever so slightly throughout, right? Like, so that's something that like I feel became my first mirror in a certain way. And creating this story that I've sort of been building since say like now 2011 has been my way of making sense of what this shift is basically. So it became a way for me to process the world in a very material, physical sense, but also in a kind of conceptual or mythological sense where the narratives or the kind of larger structures that were informing this shift became a way for me to negotiate those larger structures also and make sense of them on the level of stories, like as opposed to some kind of overarching heavy narratives that need to be taken as a given. So it was almost like kind of throwing all of this into some kind of chaos. So I started, in art school, essentially doing performances. So you must remember, like, in 2010 and 11, there were these skywalks that were coming.
Yes.
Like, I was really fascinated by the idea itself. Also they wanted to create Bombay into Singapore or Shanghai or something like that. No? So
dystopian future.
Literally.
Bombay will be like Singapore.
Exactly, and
77 skywalks are being.
And where are they right now, right? Like, that was the main drive, like, to understand what are these appendages that are growing on the city in a certain way. So, do they even belong to the material reality of the city? Which is, it has its own way of like negotiating people with structures with non-human, like the human and the non-human negotiate with each other through the city. In a very interesting way, actually, Suketu Mehta wrote about this.
Maximum City.
Yeah.
That book was quite phenomenal for its time.
Actually, there's this one idea which I think still holds true, which is he says that so Bombay operates on a currency. It's a currency of negative value. Okay. Now this currency is lafda. ठीक है ना? तो लफड़ा नहीं मांगता ना, तो आगे देते रहो, like you're trying to just pass it on, and then it kind of tips over, and so he kind of described it in this interesting way that this you can't really describe it as conflict, in a very aggressive sense also. This is certain. It's not entirely frustration also. It's some other thing only, which doesn't really translate in English, but there is a certain excitement to Lafda also. Na? He treats it as a negative currency, which I thought was very interesting. And anyway, so now the city was growing these appendages in metal and chrome and everything, right? So what I started doing was I started making costumes, and I would dress up and get my friends to dress up, and then we'd just go roam around and take whatever, play instruments, so that became a fun way of just playing with the city as a playground essentially. And then from there, I started kind of looking at, okay, what are the stories of these characters that I'm bringing in? Who are they? Why are they getting displaced in the city like this? So that kind of led me to, just kind of go back in a way to comics that I've been reading, or characters that I've been encountered in some myths, and then starting fleshing out those stories, so, and literally it just works like that, in terms of I end up with something and then it becomes a found object, say a story or an object becomes something that's just a point of departure, and then that leads to a narrative, a performance.
Story.
Yeah. And it's all one story, so I don't really know
what started, which idea ended when.
Exactly.
So it's like a tree.
Yeah, literally. It's completely branching, meandering in that sense.
What kind of fascinated me, that your art is you're trying to kind of make a world, almost kind of. Maybe if you take all your creatures and put them in one environment, maybe I don't know if they would talk to each other or dance with each other. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I love the idea of 7,000 rules or no rules, because actually 7,000 rules means no rules, right? Because you can't really, they're bound to contradict each other, right?
Yeah.
And I am very interested in that, in terms of, I see this act of art making, I made art in the broadest sense possible, not just kind of contemporary art. I feel contemporary art itself has this language of separating itself from everything,
what I don't like about the whole art thing is that everyone wants to kind of draw a boundary and classify themselves as to I do NFT art, I do painting, I do doodles, and nobody wants to kind of think about beauty. I don't know.
Yeah. In fact, it's almost like beauty is a profane thing to say right now, or the idea of the sublime. And at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, we are helplessly trying to kind of just find pathways to the sublime, right? And I don't mean this in some kind of deep spiritual way. It's just part of being human. It's this massive unknown that we're confronted with, right? There's this Greek word for it, thauma.
Okay, what does it mean?
Literally means the fear but also exhilaration of being alive. When you kind of know that you are, there's this world that's kind of bombarding you with on a sensorial level, on a physical level, on a mental level, just that fact of knowing this thing exists, the only people who are kind of comfortable with it, with that, because they aren't able to see that separation, are infants, right?
I actually at a stage when an infant starts making meaning of the world, maybe he's 2, I don't know, 3. The age under that, if it is I don't know what they think, when let's say you see a TV and you don't know whether to call it a TV. I mean, I wonder how life is like. Like, sometimes I wonder, like, because by the time you are like maybe 2.5 or 3, after that you're taught like this is a cup, this is a phone, and then you start classifying more and more information about an object. This breaks, this is used to drink, things are hot in it. Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's exactly what it is, no? Like, you'll see these, like, little creatures kind of just, like, staring at their hands and laughing, right? It's the most beautiful thing as well, like, to kind of see a child full of joy, but, like that separation between the world and themselves, their being, doesn't exist, right? Like, what is world? What is being? It's all one thing, right? And that kind of collapses in a certain way, right? Like, so then the task of, like, art, of like, kind of literally everything that we do is about, like, somehow finding pathways back to that feeling of, like,
primal feeling. I think there's a saying by Picasso that not everyone can draw like a child. I mean, something like that. And when you start drawing like a child, it's the most hardest. Something like that. I just can't.
Like, I mean, you see it with every kind of even philosopher of becoming. So, for example, Friedrich Nietzsche would say that, like, the task is to arrive at a second dangerous innocence. And that's a scary prospect, right? Like, because of it literally means risking everything for that immense kind of experience of the sublime. That's kind of what I'm interested in. So, in fact, the one work that, like, I mean, it literally got me through the pandemic also, like, was this story that I chanced upon. So, I actually love telling this story, So, it's this place in Amgaon is 90 kilometers outside of Pune, and it's a copper age dig site. So now what's interesting about it is that it was discovered in the 60s by Dr. Dhaulikar, and he found that there are two kinds of burials happening in the same space.
Okay.
So there were 243 bodies that they found outside.
Oh, wow.
Which were, like, all lined up like compasses. So head facing north, feet facing south, and the feet are chopped off at the shins. So now I was kind of researching this at the Deccan College, also reading up about it, and Dhaulikar and his team, they were making conjectures that, maybe this was a ritual to let them leave the land and things like that. Okay, now what was interesting about that place was this is happening outdoors, and they're not sort of killed in some kind of violent way and all. It's very almost like a kind of honorific kind of burial. They're buried with their utensils, ornaments, things like weapons, etc. So this is happening outdoors, and then indoors you have like these massive terracotta pots. Okay. So some are 4 feet, 6 feet, and they have, like, some have 4 legs on them. They have all these motifs of anthropomorphic forms. Like a panther becoming a human, and now these are placed indoors. Okay. So, like, in fact, children are placed in 2 pots, like, ghade leke, aise turned on each other like a capsule.
What?
Yeah. So this is happening, like,
sounds crazy.
I mean, it's amazing, right? Like, what's really cool though is, like, so if you have 2 kinds of burials happening in the same place, that means you have 2 different conceptions of the afterlife.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Which essentially means you have 2
civilizations.
Yeah, maybe. Living together. Really.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what happened was, because there's no signs of violence, nothing, these people were buried in accordance with their rituals, with differing beliefs. Okay, so what happened was, I just before the pandemic hit, I had gone to Korea. In South Korea, there's this other island called Jeju, and there's a copper age dig site over there around the same time period, and turns out they have the exact same kind of burial going on.
What are you saying?
Yeah, it blew my mind.
Okay.
So, and
the same shin thing.
No, so they have these spot burials that happen with them. So they have one kind of burial, right? So I went to them and I said that, like, is this, maybe there was some kind of trade happening because there's the exact same thing happening in Amga. So turns out there's no sign of trade because there's no coins or seals that are transferred. Aisa kuch nahi hai. But they told me that, like, this practice now of burying in pots was happening all over the world wherever the Copper Age existed. Just to kind of paint a picture, the world wasn't that connected at that time. Right? There was no travel by sea also. At the most you could go fishing, but like you can't traverse these like oceans. So how did these people come together? Right?
How did these happen parallelly at the same time?
Yeah. So now there's this, phenomenal historian, Tony Joseph. He talks about this idea. He has a really cool name for it also, the pizza-based theory of, how India was populated. So he says that there's this first out of Africa migration which happened, which became the sort of first people to inhabit, along the Indus. And then over subsequent migrations from across the Hindu Kush and different parts of the world, India was populated by different people at different times. And what's interesting is that Inam now becomes one site where this you see this confluence. You see people of different cultures, proto-cultures,
living together. Now?
Well, in 1500 BC. And, it's something that, sometimes I cringe even saying it, but it's essentially the founding idea upon which this nation's built, right? Like unity in diversity.
Yeah.
And that code of ethics existed in a time from which we are completely cut off, both in terms of language, culture, our like the food that we eat right now, or like the kind of lives that they lived and we live right now. We're completely cut off from it. But this is one thing that does bind us to it. This sense of shared history that exists in this place. And this is the show that I got to bring to the CSMVS Museum.
Oh, okay.
And it was quite like. It just came together in this really beautiful way. The director of the museum, she invited me and she said that, it already speaks to the history of the museum as well, because they have some of the burials
of the Copper Age.
Yeah. I said, I want to do it here. And it was this beautiful thing that, that just says that, these kind of broken fragments of the past essentially tell us that, we've always been a society that has been diverse.
Yes.
I got to recreate that
in the show.
Yeah, in the show, so I recreated all the pot burials and the these kind of plaster artifacts that were being left behind as some kind of post-human crypt. So looking at this museum site, but from 5,000 years in the future.
Yeah.
Right? And the curators of this crypt museum were these black forms that look like they're covered in oil and they're just roaming silent librarians in that space. And at the very end, there was this AI program that I showed.
Oh, okay.
So now the AI program was this sort of three-legged kind of creature, completely. It was I'd taken these 3D models of fossils and rendered them to look like they're glossy and covered in oil like that, and and then it was kind of listening to all the voices in the museum,
And how was people's reaction to this interpretation of history?
So that was actually really amazing. So what I.
You're used to this boring history in terms of text or just images. Because nobody kind of the layer that you put about imagination or what was people's reaction? Because the hardcore historians must be
so not only historians, there were common people, there were also very right-wing people. What was really fun was, so we had no labels in this. We had a few books, I'd made these zines that were placed which people could, there were places you could sit and read them. But it wasn't the first thing you encountered.
Okay.
So, in fact, the way the space was designed was like, वो जो अपना SS वाले ये होते हैं ना,
slotted angle shelves.
Shelves. So a lot of the work was on those shelves.
Oh.
Because that's how it's like.
That's like archaeological sites or like the classification is done like that. Yeah.
Like for me,
the first time it's kept there.
Exactly.
Yeah,
like
not in a museum. Yeah.
Like in fact, in the museum storage they use those. Like, and they're not even SS. Some of them are MS also. Like some of the comments that we were getting were, like these artifacts are really well preserved. For example, like and like they were just made like 2 years back. They weren't really that old, and because there were no labels, that also kind of prompted people to kind of make their own stories about them. Which we pushed. Like I mean, so one of the series of workshops was we invited children to first, like they were taken through all the other spaces in the museum. How is like in label making, how the history making project,
how the world is classified as units.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is this age. This is this age. Yeah.
And like you'll have like a little bit of things that give it like a kind of verifiability and things like that, right? So we showed them all of that and then brought them to the installation space and said, okay, now tell your stories with these objects. Where did they come from? Like, and we got absolutely amazing tales. Like I mean, people made it their own, literally.
And some of the stuff that I saw, like when going through your work, is I think you really love the idea of animating or creature. I mean, or maybe I don't know, like giving life to a form. That's so fascinating to me because, like, being an artist, you can kind of give life to so many, but you kind of find this sometimes creatures with no eyes or sometimes things that kind of do things. And I saw that one show where there was this walking kind of orange or red color thing. And I was like, wow, like this is like one way of like I have not seen a lot of artists who kind of just do that. And why and I'm very curious why you do that.
I mean, essentially, it's a game that I'm kind of.
So it's like a world in your head.
Yeah, always. Very much. Like I mean, sometimes it becomes a bit of a problem also. That I'm living too much in.
You know what fascinates me is that I've seen, like we spoke about Ranji, and I've seen him drawing things, and that was just the pencil medium with paper.
Yeah.
And now with the kind of technologies that we just spoke about, which is unreal, it kind of gives us the power to kind of really make these creatures maybe breathe and talk and like inhabit worlds. And I kind of was very curious as to how you see this. Maybe when you were a student of art, whether you really thought that would be the trajectory that you would kind of.
So I actually always wanted to make video games. Art school I went because I wanted to just get really good at like anatomy and things like that.
Yeah.
So that I could do like video game art. I wanted to work for like Industrial Light or Magic. And things like that. And Star Wars, the characters and all that. I still do that. Like I mean, I still like kind of
on the side, kind of, like do a little bit of
like fan art. That was kind of what I was thinking about. In 2018, actually, now I was at this residency in Stuttgart, and this place called Schloss Solitude. It's this castle essentially, and there were these like hackers, programmers who were like doing. They were also, I mean, those guys were like next level. They were building their own internet. Like literally, So they would kind of have these like massive haversacks, and just like the whole thing is like pouring out with like Raspberry Pis and Arduinos. And the idea was that like you could set up a local internet anywhere. You could piggyback on anyone's server and like set up your own like intranet essentially. And the reason why they were doing this was like to kind of bypass a lot of these. Eastern Europe censorship हो रहा था so they were trying to build and I mean really kind of amazing people, so they were like, hey, check out Unity, it's like really easy to pick up and whatever. So I was like, ठीक है देखते हैं. So that's how I kind of got into it. And and then since then I've kind of moved to like playing with Unreal. This one's called Anhad, and the way that it works is that so, while I'm speaking, it's kind of picking up sound, and it's essentially this being is driven by a collection of AI scripts. Now, the idea of creating this thing was that to somehow create a conception of the human body.
Yeah.
Like pose a question to essentially the central myth of Indian society, which is the caste system, right? Like, and caste is completely premised on a myth, right? That there's this Manu at the center of the universe, and I mean, that plays out from there, right? Like, so that separation in Manu's body from like the head and the foot is supplanted onto society, right?
Yes.
And that becomes the kind of structure that
handed over structure.
And anyone who lies outside of that body doesn't belong to society, right? And we see very real kind of sort of outcomes of this, like in say the CA and NRC laws that they were trying to pass. Imagination of the world based on this myth creates a certain kind of society. So then if we are able to conceive of a body, a being that where that hierarchy of mind and limb has collapsed, like is indistinguishable from each other, what kind of a world can we think about?
Yeah.
You know, and this is not to say that like this is a sort of idea or this conception of seeing the world is something that is purely Indian. And, Descartes says that like I think therefore I am. He does something very similar. He creates a kind of separation between thought and the world. And the body also then becomes part of the world, right? So he's kind of again putting the mind at the sort of top rung of this hierarchy, and then everything that lies outside of it is kind of secondary and doesn't belong, and is essentially either a resource or a parasite.
Yeah.
And this applies to even human bodies, as we've seen in the history of the way colonization has played out, slavery has played out, and the after effects of globalization play out constantly every day. So now, again, how does one collapse this? How does one get beyond these limits?
Yeah.
Right. So there's this Sikh poet. His name is Harinder Singh Mehboob. He says "Utte Raga," right, which means in Punjabi, there's this song that lies before or precedes the world that we find ourselves in.
Okay.
So the entire continuum of being, of everything, of this conversation that we have, the air that we're breathing right now, this cup, all of this is resonating in rhythms of that song.
Oh,
right. I mean, this is metaphysical kind of idea, and he says that man or humankind has separated himself from that song by naming things, by saying that I am man. This
is an object. This is called a laptop. This is called a cup.
And then kind of taking those separations, those categories as true, he has broken himself from that song. And he, Mehboob's conception is that the task of all art, of what today we call the humanities, is to return to that song. So what the way he describes it actually is he says birds remember that song. Because birds mourn their dead in music. Or even the morning kind of call of the bird is a roll call. Which they're just singing to their fellow birds, and that they made it.
So the act of naming things and the act of classifying, or the act of doing things, taxonomy as human beings, is kind of killed the meaning of the life, and that's why these creatures that you have, nobody knows that it's a hand or a leg or a head or a tail. And that's why it moves not like a human. Okay. So it all makes sense to me now. Yeah.
It comes from a Doha by Kabir. And the Doha goes, Had had karte sab gaye, behad gaye na koi, anhad ke maidan raha kabira se. And what it means very simply is that limits are all they speak of, but they dare not cross them. Behad gaye na koi. Anhad ke maidan mein raha kabira se, which means not beyond those limits, but in a place where the idea of limits only doesn't exist. You know, in that
boundless.
Yeah, is where I'll be waiting for you. You know, in that sense, that's where Kabir will wait for us.
You can cut it.
Yeah. Thank you.